Hello, conference. I'm going to be presenting about 7 eccentric habits that are seen in Voynich's paragraphs, specifically those involving gallows glyphs, that is, the ones that are recorded in either as K, T, P, and F. Now, there are more than 7 habits or behaviours involving these glyphs, but I've narrowed the choice down in this paper to the ones that have ones with particular focus on what they say about individual scribes of the manuscript, and also in order to demonstrate that there are multiple mechanisms behind these chosen effects. So the methodology section of the full paper covers various elements, including the reasons for the particular sample that was chosen, and also the decision to focus on the first 3 scribes that were identified by Lisa Fagan-Davis's paleography work on the manuscript. It also covers the choice of the 4 gallows glyphs, even though it's possible that there are meaningful variations. It explains why these 4 have been chosen. Also, the decision in general to avoid assessing the gallows behaviour at line starts, because line start behaviour deserves its entire own volume of papers. And lastly, that section clarifies that when I'm referring to text or mechanisms, this does not assume that the glyphs convey meaning. Nothing here in this presentation or in the paper is intended to take a position on whether the manuscript contains meaningful language or gibberish. It's only that for either one of those, there must be some kind of mechanisms that generate the effects described here. So the first habit, we'll go swiftly through this one. It's a feature that most people will have spotted shortly after looking at the text. It's very well known, dating back to Courier. Sometimes it's referred to as grove words. So this behaviour is that paragraphs tend to feature a gallows glyph as their initial letter, and with heavy reliance on 2 gallows in particular. When we look at each scribe's most common paragraph initials, we do see some small differences. For example, how scribe 2 treats Q, how scribe 1 treats K. But these small differences take place against a backdrop of strong consistency. All have P as their most frequent initial, with T as the most common. And together, P and T make up 75% of the paragraph initials for scribe 2, and also for scribe 3. And for scribe 1, this is still a high amount of 50%. So these kind of stats, this frequency, would lead us to expect the gallows glyphs, in particular P and T, to be very common word initials elsewhere. But as we see from the second habit, the gallows glyphs fall far, far short of that expectation. Now, P is over 50% of scribe 2's paragraph initials in the table here, and yet it's less than 3% of the line start initials and 2% of midline initials. And we see a similar trend for the other scribes and for the other gallows. So all scribes share the same top 5 line start initials, Y, O, D, Q, S, although in different orders. And it's similar for the general initials, although notably C replaces Y. So like the paragraph initials, we see here a limited range. And within that range, there's almost nothing in common with paragraph initials. So whatever is responsible for the limited range of glyphs for initials, these mechanisms are different depending on where the word falls in the paragraph. So on to the third habit, which is again something that's been noted in the literature. P and F appear disproportionately often in the top row of paragraphs. When we look at all the instances of P, about 58% of them are in the top row, 68% for F. It's quite a staggering volume there, and it's hard to imagine a natural process that causes this. It's not impossible. For example, the top row could contain Latin names of the plants, and the rest is written in the vernacular language. with the occasional Latin word sprinkled in, etc. So the P glyph in that case would be a common sound in the Latin, but not in the vernacular. But in that case, all the choirs would need to have the same kind of structure there, despite appearing to be different topics. Alternatively, and quite artificially, the writers may have chosen to depict the same glyph differently for the top row. But then we still see about 1/5 of P's instances in the lower lines. Now, a second interesting point is the distinction we see here between the 4 gallows. So P and F mostly found in the top row, K and T mostly found in the lines below. And this distinction is seen in all 3 scribes. When we consider the share that each gallows has of all the top row glyphs, we can see across all scribes that the share that P has of top row glyphs is larger compared to its share of total glyphs. So here we see that there is a difference of about 2.3 percentage points between P's total share and its share of the top row glyphs. Conversely, K is decreasing, so it is about 5% of scribe 1's glyphs, for example, but it drops down to 2.5% of scribe 1's top row glyphs. So we see in this table for scribe 1 a drop of 2.4 percentage points. So this habit implies a mechanism that causes most, but not all, instances of P and F to be in the top row, but not T and K, and it may also cause K to appear there less than we would expect. Now, habit 4 builds on this. So we know P and F are attracted to the top row. What habit 4 tells us is that their position within a word varies depending on where that word is in the top row. So let's look at P. When the word is at the start of a paragraph, then the vast majority of the time P is in the initial of the word, so 96% there. Now, when it appears elsewhere in the top row, the statistics reverse themselves. The vast majority are now in the middle of the word, so about 87% middle, 12% initial. And the F glyph shows a similar reversal. So this would seem to suggest more than one mechanism at play here. There's at least one that results somehow in gallows being attracted, for lack of a better word, to the top row, and at least one resulting in the gallows position within the word to shift depending on where in the row it is. Is it at paragraph start or is it elsewhere in the top row? So this is backed up by the behaviour of K and T. We know they're not, for want of a better word, attracted to the top row like P and F are, but for T we see a very similar shift in its position in the word. 86% initial at paragraph start, 90% middle when elsewhere. Now, interestingly, K behaves differently. When the word is further along the top row, the majority of K is in the middle of the word, and so far that's the same as what we've seen. But when the word is in paragraph start position, we don't see the reversal of the glyphs that we'd be expecting from what we saw of the other glyphs. The majority of K, 60%, are still middle. Now, for the other glyphs, we see the behaviour overall. We see it replicated at the level of the individual scribes. But for K, we don't quite see that consistency between the scribes. Scribe 1 does actually have a reversal for K at paragraph start. So we see 65% as initial, 35% middle here, which is quite different from the other scribes. Now, the sample size is small, but this is in keeping with what we've already seen in the first habit about scribe 1's greater preference for K compared to the other scribes. So we've seen evidence now that there may be multiple mechanisms affecting gallows behaviour in relation to position in the paragraph and position in the word. The next 2 habits show us that there are also variations in the glyphs that precede and follow the gallows glyphs. These variations are set out in detail in the paper in various tables, but the most interesting statistics are there in the slides. So at paragraph start, 75% of all P instances in the sample are PO or PC. Both of those are approximately the same there, around about 37%. Now moving to the top row, we suddenly see divergence. So PC increases its share to 55%, while PO plummets all the way down to 7%. Now for T, both TC and TO have a large drop from the paragraph start position to the top row, as you can see here in this slide. Now for K, both KC and KO also drop from paragraph start to the rest of the top row. So what rises to take their place? Well, as we saw from the previous slide and this one, TA increases its share from 7% to 23%, KA doubles its share, and both TE and KE also show large rises. Interestingly, unlike TE, KE is already large at paragraph start position with almost 30%. And this could be linked to how we've seen that K tends to be in the middle of the word at paragraph start, unlike T. So we see here hints of a trend that gallows plus C, gallows plus O tend to be more common at paragraph start position than elsewhere. In contrast, gallows plus E and gallows plus A are more common in the top row and then the rest of the paragraph than at paragraph start. And the exception is P, in that PC actually rises from paragraph start to top row, and we don't have instances of PE. But we do see an increase of PA and, quite interestingly, an increase of PH as well. Let's look at the glyphs now preceding gallows in a word, and these tend to be C, L, O and Y. We'll compare the top row with the rest of the paragraph, since, as we've seen, gallows at paragraph start do tend to be word initial, and so won't usually have a preceding glyph. So we can see from this table that op is almost 2/3 of the glyph pairs with P in the top row, but this then drops to below half for the rest of the paragraph. And in parallel, we can see CP increasing its share, going from the top row down the rest of the paragraph. We can also see that OT has over 75% of glyph pairs with T in the top row, and this huge amount drops down to about 60% for the rest of the paragraph. And meanwhile, we do see CT increase again, like we did with P. Here it doubles in size. So K, as usual, is the outlier. OK remains stable, whether it's top row or lower rows, and interestingly we see LK making up almost 1/5 of the K pairings in the top row, far more than we see LT or LP. And LK shows a small drop when we do go below top row, and we see a small rise for CK. So overall, O is a very common preceding glyph for all the gallows here in the top row and for the lines below, with C coming second best. But for both P and T, O's share drops when we move below the top row, while simultaneously C's share increases. So both the fifth and sixth habits imply that there is some kind of mechanism that's leading to variation in the glyphs before and after the gallows, depending on where the word is. Now, those were overall trends. Do they hold up at the scribe level? So the last habit reveals differences between scribe 1 and the others when we focus on glyphs that are following gallows. The full paper shows the stats for gallows pairs broken down by both position and by scribe, which means in some cases the sample is going to be too small for conclusions. But there are still some interesting hints at trends. So all scribes reflect the overall same trend for gallows plus O to be more common at paragraph start than elsewhere. And we also see KO and TO continue to fall further when we go below top row. Gallows plus C showed the same trend overall, apart from PC, which showed a large increase in its share from paragraph start to the top row. When we look this at the scribal level, we can see that this increase is actually driven only by scribe 2 and 3. scribe 1 sees an increase in pH instead. We can also see at the scribal level that KC's overall fall is actually mainly driven by scribe 3. Scribe 1 increases its share at the top row, and scribe 2 stays stable. However, we should note that those two scribes, their sample sizes are very small at paragraph start. So we also saw of the last habit an overall trend for gallows plus A and gallows plus E to be more common elsewhere than paragraph start. Looking at the scribal level, this mostly holds out, with one exception. Scribe 2 does show a small decrease for KE, but this could be due to only having 20 instances at paragraph start for K total. And we see KE actually increase its performance when we move from the top row to the rows below, also as the sample increases. So generally the overall trend broadly holds across the scribes, but from this we can also see a cross-cutting trend for the K and T gallows. Now gallows plus O and gallows plus C tend to perform better at paragraph start and worse elsewhere. They also tend to be more common for scribe 1 than they are for the other two scribes. Conversely, gallows plus E and gallows plus A tend to perform less well at paragraph start and better elsewhere, and they also tend to be less common for scribe 1 than they are for the other two scribes. Now P is excluded from the table due to its smaller sample sizes below top row, and so are bench gallows, since they have their own behaviour, again worthy of another paper, particularly when they're used by scribe 1. And within this table we do see some possible exceptions. We must also bear in mind the small sample sizes for paragraph starts, especially for K. So this means we can't say for certain there's a correlation between scribe 1 favouring a glyph pair more than the other scribes do, and the words behaviour in the line for all three scribes. But this table does seem to hint at a connection that's worthy of future study. So those are the 7 habits or behaviours that this paper has chosen to cover. This paper isn't intended to set out what mechanisms could cause that. That's far beyond one paper. But for this future work to explain all the effects and the other effects not covered, it will be important to consider both how a potential mechanism could work and the purpose behind it. For the way that a mechanism could work, for some of the behaviours we could be looking at prepending going on. So for example, a gallows glyph being added to the beginning of the real word. There's quite a bit of study done on this by others noting that paragraph start words often can be found elsewhere without the gallows glyphs, and also for line starts. Another example could be a kind of simple mutation at play, such as K being changed into P, or perhaps a more complex transformation, KE being changed into P, or something even more complex. Those are just a few examples. Looking at the purpose behind the mechanism, could be looking at a gallows glyph being a paragraph start for formatting purposes, to mark the start of the paragraph. Some could be there for cosmetic purposes. Is it a coincidence that we find the more ornate glyphs P and F both at paragraph start and the top rows, aka exactly where there are large empty spaces to decorate? Another purpose could be to cause confusion. The glyphs could be added as nulls, or they could have been transposed as part of a cipher. Or they could have been placed there as part of a hoax that is masquerading as a cipher, and therefore needs to have hints of rules in order to disguise the gibberish and lure in any would-be decipherers. Mechanism could also be natural, by which I mean it could be related to the grammar of a language, the choice of topic, the style of the writer. All those could in theory lead to a particular word's tendency to appear disproportionately in one place. Now, those aren't the only examples of possible mechanisms, but each of those has problems as an explanation. The biggest problem, biggest drawback, and the main point of this presentation is that none of them can explain all these multiple habits. For example, if we take the idea that gallows are prepended to a word to denote a paragraph, that doesn't explain by itself why we see different gallows doing that, or why they appear in the middle of the word when the word is elsewhere in the row, or indeed all the other habits here. So this is the main conclusion of the paper. Whatever's behind the manuscript, there isn't one simple single mechanism. like a simple substitution cipher. There isn't one single one that explains all of these habits. There is a combination of mechanisms behind these effects. And by focusing on differences in scribal behaviour and the position of the glyphs, these may in time help provide us with the clue to what those mechanisms are. Thank you.